Hello everybody, Mark Schaffline with you, and this is the Schaffline Report. It's Tuesday's edition, and we are broadcasting from beautiful Irvine, California, and from the great state of Texas. Dallas, take it away. Nate Fisher, welcome back to Schaffline Report, or welcome to Schaffline Report, I should say. Happy to have you with me today.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Folks, Nate has a background as an entrepreneur, as a fund manager, and as an investor. And what we thought we'd talk a little bit about today, Nate has a unique strategy for all you anti-woke folks out there. It's called the woke-proof economy. Nate, tell us a little bit about that, your investment strategy, and your focus really on conservatives.
Sure. So I started New Founding, the company I've been running for about 2.5 years. I started it as I saw the politics really begin to pervade all aspects of society and all aspects of corporate America. You went from a world where there were a few sort of signs of liberalism in companies to one where companies are where this culture is permeating corporate America to the point that it's shaping marketing, it's shaping HR culture, it's alienating many of the best employees, it's alienating many of the best customers. And you saw this with Bud Light with their disaster. Yeah. And that creates an opportunity. I mean, generally when people in business make a mistake, one of the best things you can do is take the other side of that trade. And I think the other side of that trade is building and backing businesses that are either filling gaps that are going to be open because of the politics of the dominant players, or serving customers who are alienated or underserved by those. So that's what we do. So we have a venture firm, we have a fund. We just launched a fund in the last couple of weeks, but we've been doing investments and we've been co-founding companies for a while. And what we do is we look for those opportunities. We look for companies that sell to American consumers with marketing messages that affirm their vision of life, that provide critical infrastructure for our movement. So things like CRM software. Mark Benioff at Salesforce is one of the most active and obnoxious political activists in the space. No one trusts him. If you're going to invest a lot in a CRM, you really, really, really want to trust who that comes from. So that's the sort of example of something that we're talking to potential people interested in that. That would be a company that we'd be interested in backing, all the way to areas where I think we may have an advantage with new and disruptive technology as a movement, because guess what? A lot of conservatives who are dissatisfied with the status quo may actually be set up to be early adopters of a new technology and sort of set the tone as kingmakers of the new space. If we're the first ones to dominate the new network, our company may be the winner in the space. So it's a whole range of opportunities like that we look for as venture investors.
And Nate, you mentioned earlier about the evolution, how you used to buy a product from a company that they didn't let politics get in the way. I mean, they maybe kept it to themselves or their individual rights, obviously, whether you're Democrat or Republican, independent, how you vote, et cetera. But boy, over the last couple of years, maybe 3-4 years, it has exploded. I mean, it's just like everywhere you turn, whether it's social media, old media, online, whatever, the woke agenda and the politicization of everything, it was like an in-your-face attitude. So, was that the genesis of you guys saying, hey, wait a minute, there's a whole niche of people out here that we can really serve here?
I would say it's two things. It became clear that there was a need. And I think it became clear to a lot of people that this is no longer, let's say you're a very talented person. Working for an aligned company went from being a nice to have to something that's going to be deeply motivating. I have a friend. He's an equity analyst at a large investment firm, at a large asset allocator. Very attractive job, the kind of thing that people come out of business school and they want to be on the buy side like that. 5 years ago, he was complaining about the bureaucracy in the company. There were too many people. They're trading too often. But it was sort of tolerable. He would have to write an equity report when he wants to recommend a company. Well, starting about 3 years ago, he now has to write, for every stock he recommends, he has to write an equity report and he has to write an ESG report.
Oh God!
If you're a mediocre person, you just like to check the boxes at work. Sure, whatever, that's what you do. But if you're a top performer, that's infuriating. There's nothing that frustrates those people more than mindless, pointless work like that. That guy is looking to leave. He's looking for another opportunity. He's the kind of person that any sort of small or mid-sized business should kill to have. One of just incredibly hardworking, incredibly smart, incredibly conscientious and diligent. And you have people like that all across the country looking for new opportunities at this point. So that alone is a huge opportunity for new businesses that are just going to cut this out of their culture. That's one example of this. Now, I think the other side is you see our political space becoming more and more dysfunctional in many, many ways. And yet people are deeply concerned about their country. They're looking at an opportunity to have change. What we are offering, what I think business actually offers, is a way to have concrete change in the country with far fewer structural impediments than you're often going to face in conventional politics. So our motto is build the America you want to live in. It's really a call to action to people who care about our country. Come, jump in, and actually build it. And the beauty of the business world, the beauty of America, even with the flaws today, is there's still an incredible range of opportunity to go just build something if it needs to exist.
Yep.
And that draws people. It inspires people.
Oh, there's no question about it. And backlash against ESG investing. I mean, Larry Fink, BlackRock, largest asset manager in the world, he's getting pushed back on it. I mean, they don't even seem to talk about it anymore. I know it's out there, but remember like a couple of years ago, they were pushing it. Everything had it. What's their ESG score? What are they doing on this? What are they doing on that? It didn't matter whether you were tuning in CNBC, Fox Business, Bloomberg, you name it. That was all the rage. Now, Nate, you're not hearing as much about it. Did they just put it behind the curtain? Is it still there? Well, how's that playing out now?
So I think there were a few factors that played into the decline of it. One, obviously, is ESG was very popular, coincidentally, during sort of zero interest rates, massive boom in the NASDAQ, energy glut. I mean, right. It has nothing to do with ESG. It's just ESG focused on the things that happened to do extremely well, so it made their funds look good, and energy was in a cyclical down cycle. Well, end of those interest rates, end of that trend, energy is now up. Big SaaS companies are down. ESG just doesn't look so hot anymore. So part of it was, I think they, through no virtue of their own, they allocated to things that did well. And there's a lot of people who just sort of mindlessly jump on, they'll believe whatever the narrative is. Suddenly, those portfolios aren't performing as well. So at least now it's not sort of, when you're losing money with a strategy, you start to think more deeply about it. I think that's part of it. I think there's a more sinister explanation, though, which is in many cases, yes, they don't use the word ESG anymore. In some sense, it's a branding, they're recognized as a branding liability, but they've actually incorporated this stuff. It's so deeply incorporated into every company at this point that it's become sort of normal now. It's the default. And so you see energy companies, even energy companies in Texas. I'm routinely talking to people who are at these big public companies, and they're deeply frustrated that they have to divert significant shares of their efforts to things that are they recognize are not good for their companies. They're not going to make their companies money. They're ESG related priorities. Right. The example is I talked to a guy who's at an underwater robotics company. How do they make their money? They service oil rigs. Of course, that's where the money is.
Right.
What is he mandated by the company leadership to do as a product guy? Figure out how to expand their market share with offshore windmills. Is that ever going to make the company money? No, it's a joke. He knows it, but it's one of those priorities. So the thing is, even when even the energy companies themselves become corrupted by ESG, it's no longer about a fund that chooses some stocks and not other stocks. It's now something that's permeated corporate culture. So I don't know that that's gone away. I think that in many ways it's sort of a recognition that talking too much about it has become a branding liability. But it's something that we need to fight, and this is where I think venture offers the possibility of sort of boldly and more directly setting a sort of different direction. People look to tech companies, they look to venture to sort of set a vision that people imitate, just like so many companies take their cues from Google on corporate culture. It was Google was the hottest thing in HR departments back in 2015.
Right. Well, I'll tell you one guy who took it just the opposite, and he got rid of all the ESG, was a guy named Elon Musk when he bought Twitter. Let's share with our audience, Nate, a little bit. There were some stories today about that. Boy, I mean, talking about coming in and cleaning house. I mean, Nate, some of these policies they had at Twitter, which was I think maybe that was the prototypical, that was the poster child for wokeism in this country. Why don't you elaborate a little bit on that for our audience?
So I think that was a great example. Elon came in and Elon recognized at the surface level the frustration of a user seeing this platform is so central to our national conversation, just being controlled by censorship. He bought it and he fired about 80% of the employees. Yeah. And guess what? Twitter hasn't gone down. That tells you something. So part of it is you have these tech companies and they have a monopoly. They have a platform that creates a network effect, that creates a monopoly. And that thing can almost run itself. I mean, you need good engineers keeping the thing running, but you don't even need to change the product that much. You don't even need that much new development, that much new innovation. You certainly don't need lots of other people in marketing and other things. So what do they do? And then they can print cash. And so what do those companies do? They tend to become bloated, and they tend to become bloated with people who are not directly producing economic value. And that's just a culture that is absolutely ripe for political capture. Because if you think about it, if you're a retailer with 3% margins, you might talk about ESG, you might talk about whatever you talk about. There's not a lot of room to turn your attention away from the business fundamentals, or you're just going to go bankrupt right away.
Right.
But when you have these sort of rich tech companies with a monopoly, then it becomes, especially one where it's, and this is the key to tech, right, is it's full of algorithms that are inherently values-laden. Any sort of algorithm that elevates some things and deprecates other things, which is inherent. You want algorithms that elevate high-quality content, is inherently going to be values-laden. So that naturally becomes a subject for political battle, and that attracts a certain type of people who really want to, they recognize that in many ways as the domain for policy in the future. It can be as impactful, changing the Google algorithm could be as impactful as passing a law in Congress in many cases. And so it attracts a certain type of people. And I think Twitter was a cesspool of those people for many, many reasons, given its history. Elon got rid of them. The thing keeps going.
Yeah,
I kept these things back a lot.
Well, it was me. I'm going to go through some of these. They had some of the things he got rid of. Get a load of this stuff, Nate. Monthly mental day of rest. What the hell is a mental day of rest? I thought that's what you did on weekends. Saturday and Sunday, you recharge the batteries. No. No, it's X now, Twitter then. Everyone, all employees were allowed to work at home. Nate, even most liberal tech companies, aren't people come to the office 3 days a week now at least?
It's returning.
Yeah.
They care about productivity.
Yeah. And here's another one. Gender diversity restrooms. I mean, high empathy, inclusion, diversity. I mean, everything that you could do to what you just described, have employees doing nothing to contribute to the bottom line, but basically doing everything to enhance their liberal, quote, values, was a perfect example. No wonder he got rid of 80% of the people. And my bet is the company's going to be more profitable in 2023 and 2024 than it was previously. Although, he did have to fire the top executives because they deceived him about some of the internal workings of the company.
It was a brilliant move. What I respect most about Elon is the guy does not hold back. He is an executive in the truest sense. He comes in, he makes decisions. And I think going back to the ESG question more broadly, I think in many ways, ESG is a manifestation of a sort of bureaucratization of our culture more broadly. Businesses are no longer run by executives who make decisions, by entrepreneurial executives. They're run by bureaucrats. They're run by people who think like bureaucrats. In many ways, I think business schools churn out people who are incredibly conformist. It's why it surprises a lot of people that the corporate world became so liberal and so woke so quickly. It didn't surprise me because I looked at the MBAs coming out of Harvard, and those guys are the most conformist people you can imagine. And when the prevailing sort of zeitgeist goes left, they're gonna embrace it more enthusiastically than anyone else. And that's what bureaucrats do. They're not independent thinkers. They're not trying to be independent thinkers. They're trying to do what the trend is encouraging. And I think that's American corporate culture writ large. So in many ways, Elon is a throwback to an earlier era where you would have true owner operators who would come in and make decisions, and they're unafraid to do what needs to be done and do it right away.
You know, it was interesting because you mentioned you're in Texas. Obviously, we know what some of the key industries in the state of Texas. But you're right. I mean, occasionally I'll be watching a business channel and I'll see an oil executive from, let's call it the majors, Chevron, Exxon, ConocoPhillips, whatever. I'm not trying to single anybody out. And I noticed the commentators, they're not asking about, well, how much oil you draw, what is your cost per barrel? I mean, they're asking, well, what are you doing to diversify your portfolio? What are you doing with solar and wind? I mean, when it's like you mentioned, a tiny, tiny fraction of a rounding error at a big oil company. It's astounding when I see some of these things. And is it more a function of liberal media trying to do gotchas with industries they don't like? Or are these CEOs really, dealing with this stuff not in the best interest of their shareholders?
So I'm afraid that I think more of them than many assume are true believers. And I think you saw this with, I believe it was the PepsiCo CEO who said something like, it was Pepsi or Coke. One of them said something like, yes, they know there's a trend against ESG. We're going to do it anyway. We're going to do the right thing. And I think that, again, these are people coming out of, if you think about it, many of these CEOs are people who came out of business schools. They never built a company. They never founded something. Sure, many of the people who build companies and found things are true believers too, but especially people who became CEO, sort of rising the corporate ranks, believing the right things, doing the right things, being in many cases fairly competent. But they are truly bought into that sort of technocratic, bureaucratic mindset where you sort of tinker with things and manage things and engineer things, and you don't have to actually build something because it's already there. And if you think about it, that mindset is perfectly suited for ESG. Because in ESG, you imagine that the entire world works that way. You just tinker with some things, you change some incentives, you can sort of engineer the social outcome you want, you can engineer the environmental outcome you want. Well, the world doesn't work that way. And I think most people who have built things, especially sort of just normal businesses in the middle of the country, they intuitively recognize the world doesn't work that way. They intuitively recognize you got to work and you got to build things, you got to hustle and you got to do a lot of things. But I think that that's not the mindset. That's no longer the mindset of most of the people running our companies today.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right about that. Hey, let me put it, I want to talk about tied in nationally, and then I want to get a little specific on housing a little bit here. Forget it's Joe Biden just a second. If you told me that you would have a president in office that had, call it 3.5, 3.6, 3.7 unemployment rate, inflation running 3%. Now, what people don't realize, that 3 is on top of 9, what it used to be. Okay. The economy growing a little over 2%. You would say, that's okay. That certainly doesn't warrant a whole lot of critique. But Nate, something underneath it is problematic because 52% of Americans, they say Bidenomics is a disaster. It's not working for them. And only 31% say it's good for them. Talk to me a little bit on a macro level here. What's going on? Because you see a lot of different businesses, a lot of different places in the country. Why is this the case when we're at such low unemployment right now?
So I think part of it is part of the low unemployment is actually labor force participation down. So you have people dropping out, and it's sort of like they see jobs, but they don't see attractive paths for them the same way. And I think that's part of it. I think part of it is they dropped out due to sort of social pathologies that have risen. I mean, increasing drug addiction, fentanyl, stuff like that. When you have low unemployment because people drop out because they're addicted to fentanyl, that's not a sign that the economy is healthy.
Right.
That's a sign that there's some deep problems here. And I think that there is this sort of malaise in the country that people recognize and they know it. And I think economists often rely on sort of, they're essentially boiled down stats that don't tell the whole picture. So that's part of it. Second of all, I think that even if you have sort of good stats by some measures like unemployment, you lack a sort of positive. I mean, Americans want to aspire to something great.
Yep.
They really, by nature, are drawn to the frontiers. They're drawn to innovation. And you have the sense that there's a lack of a sort of inspirational vision, go to the moon, that type of thing. I think Elon inspires a lot of that. I mean, why is his popularity is explained by the fact that he is pursuing bold visions. But when your sort of economic goals boil down to zero carbon and
right,
all of the sort of ESG type of goals, those just don't inspire people. They don't excite people. And I think that that dampens the entrepreneurial enthusiasm that has always been central. And that's not just entrepreneurs, that's not just the founders, but that's just people want to be part of an organization that's doing something meaningful, that's building a country. Really, they want to be building a future that they want to live in. Wow. And I think I don't think they see that. And that is profoundly depressing in many ways.
Yeah, and I'll add my 2 cents to this one too. You want to see a leader that exudes confidence. And I'm sorry, but when I look at 80-year-old Joe Biden, who half the time he speaks, he's incoherent. He has to have aides and handlers telling him which direction to go. I mean, you can say what you want, and he can tout his own program, but when you see all the stuff going on about these stories on the Biden crime family, we're not accusing him of anything. We're just sort of stating what's out there right now. And you see this, well, Bidenomics is so popular. No, it's not popular. I think it's partly the messenger, because people look at the man, and again, for all the Democrats that watch this show, I'm sorry, it's just a factual truth. The guy's 80 years old, and he doesn't exude confidence when he speaks. I don't think there's any way you can get around that. And whether you liked him or loathed him, one thing about Trump when he was president, I mean, he had a crystal clear focus on the economy. People knew he was a businessman, right, wrong, or indifferent. The guy's made billions and lost billions. But you knew that he had a sense of what was right economically for this country. Nate, am I going off the rails here, or is there something to what I'm talking?
I think that's very significant. And I think I think that is exactly, it's not just Biden. I think it epitomizes the sort of the entire bureaucratic class. They're not leaders. They're not people. They're not the sort of people who inspire anyone to follow. In some sense, they're just totems. In some sense, it's irrelevant. You see this in the extreme with guys like Fetterman and Feinstein, where they're barely coherent. I mean, Biden can utter some sentences. Biden can go out there. They don't mind having people who literally can't even form their own sentences. They can't even speak because it's irrelevant, because they're not actually running anything. They're just doing what essentially they're at the top of armies of bureaucrats who are doing what the sort of bureaucratic imperative is. And that's inertia. That's not leadership. And I think that's exactly right. People sense that lack of leadership. Again, that's the same problem with these companies. When these companies are led by bureaucrats, they're not going to do anything exciting. They know how to increase efficiency, cut costs, do stuff like that, but they're never going to build anything great or make a great move, a great technological advance. And that doesn't inspire anyone.
Well, let me shift to something about housing that caught my eye. Now, again, folks, this is not policy. There's no bills being introduced, but you're starting to hear some commentary coming out of the Democrats and White House staffers about, well, rents have been going up a lot. Now, rents were a big component of the CPI, Consumer Price Index. Rents have somewhat stabilized now that we've built literally millions of additional apartments in this country. Nate, there were ideas being, quote, floated about, well, maybe we need to start a dialogue about national rent control. Now, I got to tell you something. I cannot think of any policy, and there have been a lot of bad ones with this administration, that could possibly do more harm than some idea that's stupid. You've got some background in real estate. Why don't you share that with the folks and give your thoughts on rent controls?
Yeah, so I started my career setting up a company, buying apartments in Florida and Texas starting in 2011. And we're buying distressed apartments, essentially betting on a market recovery, knowing that these blue to red state demographic trends would continue. And the idea of any sort of national apartment regulation is insane. It's bad enough when the feds regulate economic things that they don't need to regulate, but apartments and housing is such an inherently local concept,
right?
That it's insane that they would get into any sort of apartment regulation. Now let's take that and think about rent control. Rent control is one of the dumbest possible regulatory ideas. And what it does is it destroys the incentives to maintain apartments. It destroys the incentives for people to move to the right sort of place, a place that fits them, a place that uses what they need. It essentially leads to great stagnation in the housing space, while Well, I think fundamentally distorting any market incentives related to building, to maintaining, to improving new apartments. So that would be. I think the fact that you're seeing ideas like that, I don't think you could even take it seriously from a policy perspective.
Not
I
now.
doubt anyone really is. I doubt anyone would really pursue that. But the fact that you see ideas like that raised, I think, is more of a sort of canary in the coal mine of a rise of socialist ideas on the left.
Yeah.
The left is no longer a sort of generally pro market, but maybe let's call it pro market, but somewhat of that sort of greater welfare, greater redistribution. We now have a left that is more openly and confidently promoting truly socialist ideas, and that's a disaster. I mean, that destroys countries like nothing else.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, you've seen examples of what happens in, I'm not going to pick on them, but New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, where they have these insane ideas. What ends up happening? Crime goes up, people move out. Again, you alluded to it earlier, the trends of people moving from blue states to red states. It's no accident, folks, that 800 people a day continue to move into the state of Florida. Wait a minute, what's going on down there? Well, you got a Republican governor, you have a supermajority Republican in the House and the Senate, you got an economy that's growing spectacularly in the state of Florida, you have no state income, you got a lot of good things happening, and you're not going to ever see anything like these type of dumb ideas come out. But again, I think you're right about that. And I'm not raising a red flag on this. I'm not even raising a yellow flag. I'm just saying, and you hit the key point. When you see staffers percolate ideas, all they're basically doing is saying, let's see what this one does. And you know it's a bad idea, right out of the gate when something like that happens. Listen, got a couple minutes left, Nate. Let me ask you this. 2 questions. One, I want you to talk a little bit about your firm and how people, if they want to reach out to you. And then second, give me your view of where the economy in the U.S. is going to be going for the balance of this year and into 2024 as we head into election year.
So I'll start with the second one, and I'll say, look, I tend to avoid making specific predictions. I think it's really hard to know, especially in an economy that's as engineered as ours is, where the Fed, where there's so many political actors playing a role, and so much of the economy has become fake. And I think we touched on that earlier, right? Where what the sort of stats say even differs from what people think. What I will say is I'm optimistic that there's opportunities. I think there's things that are increasingly becoming scarce in our economy, and there's going to be a return on people who are able to provide those, whether it's consumer products that are aligned with marketing message that have a positive vision, whether it's people moving, increasingly talented, ambitious people moving from woke firms to firms where they can actually build something positive. That creates a tailwind. That creates a set of dynamic opportunities that are growing. And that gets into my firm, that gets into New Founding. What we do is we invest. We invest in those companies, and in some select cases, we'll actually help co-found or bring people together to help launch those companies. How do you get involved in us? You can come to our website, newfounding.com. You can check out my Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter, Nate A. Fisher. In terms of our firm, if you're building a company, if you're building a startup seeking venture funding, we're interested in hearing from you. We have a deal room where you can come and you can share it. And even if it's not a fit for us, we have a broader list of investors who might be interested in it. And then finally, we launched a fund, and we launched it on AngelList. We launched a fund for accredited investors on AngelList that actually allows, it's a very flexible platform. It allows things that are relatively new in venture, but it's open to people. We're able to share it more broadly. It's very helpful because a huge part of what we're doing is kind of bringing together public talk about this economy with the investing. As we back companies, we're not just investing them. We're actually helping elevate them as part of an economic movement that people are excited about. So you can check that out. Again, all that information's on our website. We're excited by the deal flow we've been seeing. We're excited by the sort of growth and the entrepreneurial enthusiasm in this space. And we're excited by the number of the sort of growing appreciation for the opportunity.
Well, Nate, that is a great story. And folks, listen, he's building a good business. He's got a great following. Follow him on Twitter. Go to the website. And if you're interested, if you have a company that you're looking either for capital or to invest, feel free to reach out to Nate. Nate, thank you for joining me today. I tell you, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you'll come back and visit us again on Schaffline Report.
I would love to. Thank you for having me.
Okay, folks, that's it for today. We will be back on Thursday. We will cut through all the propaganda with you, keep you up on the politics of the day as well as economics and social issues. Thanks for viewing. Thanks for listening today. See you on Thursday.